Welcome, action fans, and thanks for joining us for another edition of All 90s Action All the Time. I'm your host, Scott Murphy, and just in case you haven't heard, this year we are returning as a monthly podcast, and throughout the year we will be looking at the films of 1993. We kick off this exploration of 1993 with our second annual edition of January. Now, our man Jackie starred in a few movies in 1993, including City Hunter, Crime Story, and Super Cop 2. Although his role in Super Cop 2 is just really a cameo, so we ruled that one out, leaving just Crime Story and City Hunter. In the end, I went with the latter, as despite Crime Story having much better reviews, I remember City Hunter being kind of dumb fun when I saw it as a kid and had an urge to rewatch it. Hopefully a decision that my guest won't hate me for. Speaking of which, I should introduce my guest right now. And the guest is, once again, you'll remember him from last month. He's a reviewer, he's a podcaster, he's a DTV connoisseur himself. It's Mr. Matt Poirier. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Scott. Thank you for having me on it. And no, I'm not upset. I think, yes, the City Hunter may not be as good as the other film, what was the Crime Story that you mentioned?
Crime Story.
Crime Story. It might not be as good as I've seen a Police Story, but that was the mid-'80s. It's not quite as good as Crime Story, but it's got two of my favorites, Gary Daniels and Richard Norton in it. Plus, so that always kind of mitigates it for me. So.
Drop it or I drop you.
Grab it!
How's that?
Just quickly, we'll do the background details on today's film. So today's film was released on the 14th of January, 1993. It was written and directed by Wong Jing, who also wrote and produced Naked Killer and directed High Risk, which is a movie we'll probably mention in a little while. And it was based on the popular Japanese manga of the same name. Critically, it is currently sitting on a actually pretty respectable 6.3 out of 10 on IMDb, 50% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 8 reviews. It doesn't have a Metacritic score. It has a 3.1 on Letterboxd. And finally, box office wise, it made roughly $14 million at the box office. I'm not sure how that good that is though, because I couldn't find the budget information. So yeah, it probably did all right. I can't imagine it being more. I'm sure it made its money back, more than its money back. I can't imagine it being $14 million. I imagine the budget was less than that. So
yeah, I mean, a good chunk of the film, it takes place in one location, and usually those kinds of movies don't end up costing as much.
And yeah, I mean, like, even though it technically takes place on a cruise ship and we get an exterior shot of a cruise ship, it was all filmed on a Shaw Brothers studio lot, that whole cruise ship interior.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, before we get into this film, have you seen this film before?
Yes. So actually, it was only about a year or two ago that I first saw it, though, because I think it was last summer. Or now it's 2020 now. I can't believe it was 2020 when I saw this. I was getting ready to do my 1,000th post on the site. And at that time, I was trying to figure out who to celebrate, as I was doing that. And we had finally just gotten a hold of Gary Daniels' Secret of King Mahi's Island, which is like one of the first two films he ever did. And it was really difficult to find. I think it was Simon Miller of Explosive Action who found a Japanese VHS rip of it. And so we were all excited to have that. So I thought, okay, I'm going to review that and sort of celebrate Daniels' career on the site. And I decided to do a letterbox list of as many of his movies as I could. So I kind of tried to consume as many as I could to have the list be as accurate as possible to kind of say, okay, I watched this one or didn't watch that one. So that's why I watched City Hunter then. I still hadn't reviewed it for the site yet, but I did watch it again for this because it had been, I think a couple of years was long enough that I needed to watch it again to be able to discuss it. But that was when I first saw it. So yeah, probably like spring of 2020.
Wow. Okay. So it's rather fresh in your memory as opposed to my memory, which is just, I don't know when I must have saw this. I think it was maybe the late 90s. Because like I became like a Jackie Chan fan in the kind of mid to late 90s. I think I saw like Rumble in the Bronx a couple of years after it came out. I'm pretty sure I saw it before Rush Hour, so I think it must have been like 97 or something. And then I just like bought a whole load of Jackie Chan films and watched a whole load of Jackie Chan films after that point and I was really big into him in the late 90s, early 2000s. I'm still a big fan now, but so I think it was probably back then. So and City Hunter is not one that was on repeat. So like I think I've only really seen it once before, and so it's a long time ago. So I only had very vague memories of it.
Yeah, well, it had been 2 years for me, and I still kind of realized when I watched it again for this episode, I realized like I had forgotten a good amount of it as well, which we'll probably talk about as we get in on it. So it was good that I watched it too, even though it had only been a couple of years.
First of all, before we properly get in on it, I don't know if it's just me because I just like martial art films and always have since I was a kid. There's something that gives me great joy every time I see that Golden Harvest logo.
Yeah, it's one of the most. So I was introduced to those films younger. I had some friends up the street who started getting like Bruce Lee movies, like Chinese Connection, things like that. And I remember the first time I saw that logo, I didn't really know what I was in for in watching those movies. But then, yeah, once the martial arts start and you see something that's very different from sort of the Western action cinematic tradition. And I agree with you that Golden Harvest logo, when I saw it for this movie, I was like, it kind of, it gives you kind of a very, like almost like a comfort food feeling.
Yes. I think like it is a comfort food feeling. I think it's like that thing of like being a kid and it being related to being a kid or something, or just like that kind of nostalgia feeling. Cause like from a very young age, I was into like Bruce Lee films and stuff like that and watched a lot of Golden Harvest stuff. And there's certain other, it's like seeing the Canon logo or the New World Pictures logo. There's certain things that are just like, yeah,
the Canon might be the best comp. Also, I guess for horror movies, New Line here in America, I know.
New Line,
yeah. You see those logos come in and the way they kind of put together. And it's funny because nowadays it's like you watch a direct-to-video or even just like a normal release and you just see tons of these different like little animations for whatever, it's like 5 or 6 different companies that are involved with the movie. And I think that's another piece of it too, is that when you just see Golden Harvest or you just see Canon, it also sort of brings you back to a kind of a simpler time when it came to movies.
That's true. When movies were generally made by like one production company, as to, like you say, unless it's like a big Disney movie or like one of the big studios, Universal, Warner Brothers, whatever, then usually you're getting like 5 or 6 of those idents because like pretty much every indie production now is made by like half a dozen production companies.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's another piece too, where it's like, I fired up this movie and I just got one opening and then we were done. Cause I was watching some Bruce Willis movies recently with Ty from like Come Up As Reviews podcast. And that was like it was like 5 or 6, and then they would also open the movie by listing the 5 or 6. They each get their own credit as well. So yeah, when it's just Golden Harvest, it does. I think it brings back evokes those memories of just as a kid, getting something from the video store and bringing it home.
Yeah, let's get into the movie proper. So, how did you feel about the film you were getting into? We get this opening scene. It's very comic booky. Basically, get Jackie having like a monologue to camera, explaining who his character is and the backstory of how he's got his female assistant, Corey. I think I'm trying. Hopefully, there's going to be some mispronunciations during the course of this episode, dear listener, and you're just going to have to apologize. I'm just going to have to apologize in advance for that. But yes, so, and we discovered like the death of his partner. Yeah, what was your opinions on that kind of opening scene and just how very comic booky and, because we get like a manga montage in front of that as well.
Yeah, it was definitely a sign that I was watching something different, right? That this was going to be, it's probably, like you said, it's going to probably be more comic. There's probably going to be more comic elements there. So there was definitely that sense that I was getting into something different. And the other thing too that was interesting that I was trying to sort of parse like how I was going to feel about it is the fact that it's the best friend's sister, right, that he's taking care of. Yeah. And it's like, oh, now the best friend's sister is older and he has a thing for her. And that was kind of awkward the way that they kind of like, oh, sisters grow up really fast or something like that. And it was kind of like, I don't know if creepy is the right word. I mean, it could have been worse, but it was just like, yeah, it was kind of all kind of awkward there, like between the friend dying and then like, oh, my friend's dead and now I've got his sister here and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, and like the friend's dying wish is that he never because like the friend knows that our hero Rio is a bit of a perv. He's a bit of a creep, and he flirts with anything that moves. And so he's like, don't try it on with my sister. That's my last dying wish. Don't try it on with my sister. And like you say, it is a bit awkward and a bit. It's not super sleazy, but it's just a bit awkward and a little bit creepy because, like you say, basically he's holding hands with a little girl coming down a spiral staircase, and she gets older as they walk down the spiral staircase, and by the time they come out the door, she's in like her early 20s, and it's just like, and then he kind of gives her like again a sleazy look or whatever, and it's just like, yeah, but you've basically raised this girl like.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things too, is it tells us kind of early on too that like Jackie Chan's character is not going to be kind of your standard, like, I don't know. It's hard to know if there's a cultural difference here or something like that, but it felt like he was not going to be a hero that you could always root for, that you're always going to side with, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting thing that like in terms of cultural differences, because I think that even though this kind of pushes it, but the anti-hero thing that, the kind of cool anti-hero that you would get kind of in like Tarantino films and stuff like that I guess that didn't really come in American cinema until the likes of Tarantino, where it's much more common in European cinema and in Asian cinema. That kind of like cool anti-hero of like, yeah, he's a bit of a creep, but also he's kind of cool.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like in American cinema, it was, I mean, the Punisher was kind of his own thing, right? That was sort of there. And I think part of the reason why they didn't use him in as many things, like, he had the adaptation with Dolph Lundgren, but it was part of that was like, they didn't know how to use him properly because, it's different when it's like, Schwarzenegger, who's like, or Stallone, right, and Rambo, where it's like they're completely just like, yeah, they're bad. They can, take everybody down, but they never do anything like you would never see Schwarzenegger in Commando like hitting on multiple women and insulting other or anything like that. Like he wouldn't be doing that kind of thing in that role.
Yeah, and I think like there's a certain thing of like it generally in American cinema. I think that if you're like an anti-hero, you can't be fun. Like, right. I think like in Asian cinema and European cinema, there's a lot of like anti-heroes who are fun characters, Where in American cinema, if you're an anti-hero, you have to be not fun. You have to be Dirty Harry. You have to be Cobra. You have to be something like that. You have to be very much humorless, totally the opposite of fun.
Right. Yeah. Complete cop on the edge, generally doesn't joke. And yeah, 5 o'clock shadow, smoking cigarettes, that kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. Clint Eastwood is probably the best example of that sort of, you remember, or Chuck Norris also kind of fits that. When I think of like his 70s and early 80s stuff, it was, he really didn't have a lot of personality. And I think it is also something that's kind of hurt the modern kind of direct to video thing, because now as they've tried to transition actors who don't normally do that kind of thing, that do maybe comedies or romantic movies, and try to have them act in these Bruce Willis movies, it's just like, okay, put on a beard and grimace. That's what you need to do. And you're right. Like we need a, I think of, some of the actors that came from Europe, like Dolph Lundgren or Jean-Claude Van Damme, who did inject more personality into their heroes.
So we get the kind of more, I think before we get into the rest of the plot in the film, and to be fair, listener, there really isn't that much plot. It's basically like a kind of Die Hard scenario with terrorists on a boat. This film is very much, doesn't really have a plot. It's more of a collection of action comedy sketches, kind of stitched together in weird and sometimes interesting ways. But before we get into the kind of the plot of the movie, I did want to talk a little bit about, what did you think of the score of the film? Because as much as I like some of the kookiness of the film, the fact that the score was relentlessly dialed up to 11 on kooky sometimes did great.
Yeah, it's there was a sense, and again, I don't know if this is a cultural thing where versus like, Hong Kong comedy versus, Western style comedies, but you're right. It felt like it was too much. It felt like there were moments where they could have, like you said, dialed it back on the kooky. I think there was a lot with Jackie Chan too, where it was like, there were moments where you're like, come on, let's just get on with it and just kind of, have something, move the plot along or something like that. And let's not do so much goofy here. And there was a sense that almost like they didn't know when to dial it back.
Yeah. And to be fair, like, I'm genuinely a big fan of goofy. Like I've talked before on the podcast about like my favorite types of action, my least favorite types of action. My favorite types of action tend to be what I would call absurdist action films. Whether that's intentionally absurdist, like John Woo or Paul Verhoeven movies, or unintentionally absurdist, like Golden Era Steven Seagal, things like that. Things that are like over the top, bizarre. These are the kind of things that are my favorites, and yes. And then on the opposite end of the scale, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but kind of my least favorites is what I would call humorless growl fests. Humor, like Taken, Law Abiding Citizen, Cobra, these things, these are kind of things, like the most recent Rambo, even though I do like some of the Rambo movies, things like that. They do nothing for me. So, I mean, this is kind of in my wheelhouse, but it pushes it so far that like, even I'm like, yeah, there doesn't need to be this many cartoon sound effects.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? I think that's how I am too. Like I would much prefer this kind of funny thing, like you said, to like a Taken or something like that, where the movie is just taking itself way too seriously. And that's the key, I guess, when you go in this sort of this goofy direction, it is a matter of like, yeah, when is it too much, I guess. And I was trying to think of like what maybe a good comp would be to this one that would like, I mean, I think of Commando is one that really definitely plays up the kitsch enough in a way. We think of that. That's probably one I think of that we think of traditionally as being one of the best, because it does kind of, all the great one-liners where it's not, it's not taking itself too seriously when it has those hilarious one-liners. And, just like, okay, Schwarzenegger's going to raid the tool shed when he's fighting the baddies, and going to take down Bennett at the end. I think that, it works. City Hunter, I think, has enough of that goofiness, but yeah, you're right. There's a point where you, like you said, the cartoon sound effects and things like that, where it's like, sometimes it overdoes it, and you're hearing it too much, or you're seeing it too much. And there is a point where it's like, okay, yeah, can we, yeah, we saw this happen before. Let's do something else or something.
And in terms of comparisons, like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of Jackie Chan films that do this really well. Mix the kind of absurdity and the kind of over the top comedy with great action. But I think like this just skews too far kind of one way in terms of the goofiness. Even though we will get to some stuff that is, some of the goofiest stuff actually does work, and we will get to some of that stuff. But I do feel like for all its goofiness, the movie does take a little while to kind of get going. Before we're kind of on the cruise ship, we do feel like we're kind of spinning our wheels a bit, and we have like the kind of absurd thing that his assistant can't wake him up, and he's in this dream where he's surrounded by all these beautiful women in a swimming pool, and that kind of drags on for quite a while. And in the kind of opening kind of 25 minutes, the only kind of really good action sequence we get is a skateboard chase, which is fun. But yeah, how did you feel about that kind of opening kind of 25 minutes before we kind of get onto the boat and like the plot, quote unquote, starts kind of getting into action?
Yeah, I think that might be the best example maybe of the goofiness going too far. It's the whole, like, she's trying to wake him up and he's like having this dream about being in a pool, being surrounded by women and all of that. And I think that's where you're like, okay, there's a point where we could have stopped this and, you know, moved it along or something. But the fact that she has to like strap him to the top of the car and drive to the meeting and all of that. Yeah, I think, like you said, it was a good amount of padding. I guess in a way it's actiony because he's on the top of a car that's driving and that's some action. But you're right, when you think of usually when I think of Hong Kong movies, or even when I think of just great action movies in general, there's usually some kind of nice action sequence to start the film off with, just to kind of get us into it. And like you said, we get, I think that skateboard thing would be great at the very beginning. I think it would have worked as enough of an action thing to get us into it, but it took us some time to get there.
I mean, like, yeah, I guess like that kind of part of the film, we do see little references in that kind of early part. We do see little references to the manga, because I read a little bit about kind of what happens in the manga, and apparently in the manga, like when Rio does any sort of kind of pervy behavior, his assistant Kaori hits him with a big hammer, and we do get like a dream sequence of her doing that. So that's a clear reference to the manga. But yeah, I think there's not a huge amount that needs to be talked about or broken down in that kind of opening part of the movie. Apart from, we do get into the thing with the beautiful ladies in the pool. I guess we'll get into more of that, of the kind of relentless perviness of this film.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yes, which we shall discuss further. But then we get this again. Some of the characters in the movie are so cartoonish. You're just like, I don't know why this character is necessarily here, or what they bring to the table. And one of those characters is Carrie's cousin, who we're introduced in a scene that he is also hitting on her. So, because every man in this film is a disgusting perv. And then he just randomly drops his trousers twice. And it's played as if it's the funniest gag in the world. And you're just kind of like, I don't get it. Like, why are we supposed to find this so ridiculously funny?
Right. She's like, he's like hitting on her and saying, like, you need to forget, Ryu, you've got to, you should hook up with me. And then, yeah, his pants fall down. And she's like, pull up your trousers. And then she walks away. And then we get some of, like, I guess the crew on the ship or whatever, or no, maybe it was some of the baddies that were getting, I can't remember, some people that were walking behind him. It just, they fall down again. And there were a few gags like that happened in the movie where I was like, what are we, who came up with that idea?
Yeah, it just seems so ridiculous. And yes, so that is where we get introduced to our baddies, because the cousin, like, he ends up having like a conversation with Richard Norton's character, Donald McDonald, or Colonel Donald McDonald, even though his character name is not introduced at this point. But yeah, he has a conversation with him, and they have a little bit of back and forth with him and his henchman, and basically the cousin is saying that he could beat them up if he wants to, and that's when his trousers fall again, but not before he makes this like a random AIDS gag, and I was like, yeah, right. Okay, this is the early 90s, I guess. Like, it's not. Oh dear. There's some things in this movie that have aged very badly.
Well, and even that, right? Because this is 93. I mean, it was only a couple years later that Noel Gallagher made a joke. I mean, his was a little bit harsher than this one, but he still made it. And I mean, this was kind of before. I mean, to some extent, I think, we didn't have the term cancel culture at that time, but to some extent, it was a huge controversy that he really had to walk back, and it was potentially damaging to their career as they were sort of taking off. So even then, thinking about it being that long ago, again, I think that might have been a cultural thing that maybe like Westerners, we sort of held that kind of joke more sacred, that we wouldn't necessarily make that, where maybe in Asia they just thought, and I think the other thing too, when I first watched this, I watched the dubbed version. I don't remember if that joke was in the dubbed version. I did the subtitle version.
There's some versions I did read in the kind of trivia and stuff like that. There is some versions of the film where that gag has been excised. So that I think some of the dubbed versions don't have that gag. I watched it with the Cantonese version with subtitles, so which had it in, but like, yeah. So I don't think every version of it has that gag in, because like, obviously they just considered it not in good taste, I guess, which it is.
Well, yeah, because I didn't remember it when I watched because I watched the dub version the first time and I didn't remember the joke. And then I watched the Cantonese this time with the subtitles and saw it, and I was like, I don't think that I feel like I would have caught that the first time, because it definitely like it hits you, like you kind of it kind of hurts the sensibilities, especially the modern 2020 sensibilities.
Well, it is one of those funny experiences of like, you watch the dub version and you always think like, it's so weird seeing all these Asian actors dubbed into kind of weird English voices. But then I kind of had the reverse experience watching the Cantonese version, where watching Richard Norton and Gary Daniels dubbed into Cantonese. And I was like, this is equally weird.
Right. Well, because then what happens is they get dubbed again, I think, when it comes to the English dub version. Because I know there's one, was it The Magic Crystal, where Richard Norton, I think he has like an Italian accent or a Latin American accent. I can't read a Spanish accent. Whoever does the voice is just completely, it's but also Cynthia Rothrock. It's always like a different voice from her.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. They often do get dubbed again when it's redubbed into English. Yeah. So you're often not hearing their voice anyway. Yeah, that is true. Because we talked a little bit about him, and you are the DTV connoisseur, and he is a big DTV star. What did you think of Gary Daniels' glorious introduction in this movie, where he's just working out in his underwear, flexing his abs, showing off his rippling biceps?
Right. That had to be a kind of a take on the Van Damme thing, right? I think I felt like that there was, because so that for me, right, that's the kind of humor or the hamming it up that I really like in a movie like this. It's funny to like see just how goofy it is. And it's like you mentioned that he was in his underwear, only I think that was supposed to be his bathing suit, because that's all he's wearing when he goes down to the pool.
That's true.
Yeah, which is just completely absurd. So he must have just looked at that and just been like, okay, I'm just, I'm in this for this reason. Hopefully at some point I could do my martial arts and that kind of thing. But, because, they kind of, again, maybe like the whole, it's going too far. Like, it was funny enough in that one opening sequence, but then like the fact that he's wearing the same thing when he goes down to the pool. Yeah, it was, of all the, Gary Daniels is one out of the DTV stars who's done all kinds of different roles. He was in like a Lifetime drama movie here. He did that a dance movie, Dance and It's On. He didn't do any dancing in it, but he played like the father of one of the dancers. So he does all kinds of weird things anyway. And I think when he was first starting out, these were the kind of roles a lot of times that he could get, because it was just like, this pretty blonde guy who worked out, who very, could do like splits and things like that. And I think it was good because it got him roles, but then I think he found out maybe after the fact that it was then difficult for him to get taken more seriously as a lead in action movies.
I'm like you, like there is certain scenes in the movie that have like a goofiness that like hit my sweet spot. And this was one of them. His introduction of just him training in his swimwear, and we just get lots of shots of his abs and his biceps and him doing the splits. It's the kind of thing that I was like, oh, this is entertaining. Yeah, I'm on board for that.
Yes. Yeah, I really think they're making fun of Van Damme there, which when you think of it in that sense, right, it's really kind of hilarious that it's almost like this guy who's like full of himself, that he just wants to see himself, in the, not wearing a lot of clothes and just showing off at, how he looks. It's one of those jokes that really hit, I think. It was really clever in this movie.
And I think we do get a lot more fun once we get onto the cruise ship. And I think some of that goofiness does work much better. I think that the chase that Jackie has on the boat where the staff are chasing him and he's got the table in front of him that he's because the staff have been told not to disturb the guests and not to kind of destroy anything, but also capture Jackie. We're just going to call him Jackie. I think, and try and capture Jackie. I think that really worked for that sequence.
Yeah. It definitely, I think, spelled like when what you want, I think, when you get Jackie Chan on a cruise ship like that is you want sort of action and fun right away. And I think, again, we talked about that padding at the beginning. This was another kind of action sequence that, had it been early in the movie, kind of would get you, engaged right away.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's unfortunate that we kind of get it kind of mixed in between. This film does, do you remember any of the characters' names? Because this film does a really bad job of introducing characters who are not her central hero, Rio, or the villain. Most of the characters, basically, we got Rio and his assistant, and then most of the other characters, including the characters that kind of help him out, get really rough introductions. You kind of don't know who they are, don't know what their background is, don't really know anything about them other than there's one guy who's a croupier who's also maybe a secret agent, and there's also a woman who is a secret agent of some sort, but we don't know why, and we don't know why she's brought a friend along who is possibly in witness protection or something, ?
Right. So that was the one character name I knew was her, not the friend, but the one that could be an agent of some sort. Her character name, I think, was Seiko.
Seiko, yes.
Yeah, because Ching-Mai Yao, I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, or Ching-Mi Yao, she did the Naked Killer series in Hong Kong.
Which the director of this film wrote and produced, yeah. Yeah,
so I recognized her, but you're right. Like for example, there's the guy with the cards who, again, we don't know what is he? He's playing cards at the table. But then he can also throw the cards, and he's like a martial artist, and he's a really cool character. But you're right. I don't remember who he was. He didn't have a name. Fortunately, as I looked through the IMDb credits, that Saiko, the other character, was just listed as Saiko's friend, which helped. But yeah, there's a sense of are they there to sort of rip off rich businessmen on the cruise and sort of use their feminine wiles to dupe them into giving them money, or are they there to investigate? Have they gotten a tip that there's this terrorist attack coming? Yeah, you don't really know why they're there. And like you said, who they are. Saiko and her friend, I was able to keep them straight. I think they did a good job, at least with the card guy, by constantly having him pull out cards that he could use to throw it at people. So I could keep his character straight. But beyond that, it was, you had the girl that he's supposed to be searching for. I can't remember what her character name was.
It's listed as Shizuko.
Okay, right. So Kumiko. Yeah. So she was in it. So yeah, you're right. It was there was a lot going on. There were a lot of people and a lot of moving parts, and I guess maybe had if maybe they were all celebrities in Hong Kong that maybe everybody would recognize. Maybe it's supposed to be like the disaster film, right? Where all the celebrities, when we watch the Poseidon Adventure or something like that, we know all the names, and maybe that's what it was more supposed to be, but. It didn't feel that obvious.
No, it didn't. And I guess I kind of only picked up the names kind of towards the end. It is mentioned later on that the card guy's name is Kotetsu. I hope I pronounced that right. And rather weirdly, the girl is listed as Shizuko on IMDb. But the Cantonese version I watched, in the subtitles, it calls her Kyoko throughout the film. So I'm rather confused as to what that character's name is.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think the problem too, right, was that like the movie almost forgets about her, right? There's points where with these characters, because we kind of lose them and come back. And then there was like the two like DJs that were kind of goofy characters that was like, which the thing with the DJs being goofy characters is that it felt like we already had the cousin who was a goofy character. But
yes, sure. It felt like they were extraneous comic relief.
Yeah, which you wonder, because, you know, we don't know the full extent of the history of this shooting. Was there something that happened with the cousin character? Like, was he doing another movie or something? They couldn't use him, so they had to bring these DJs in to fill the same role, and then they could bring the cousin back when they needed to. Or you never know, I guess.
And their characters, I read on IMDb that their characters are DJ Soft and DJ Hard, which I feel is like a sex joke, but maybe not.
Right. I think so too. I think because there is a lot of that going on in this, that it is like a lot of characters that are groping women, you know, a lot of getting handsy, a lot of having their advances being rebuffed, a lot of that kind of thing. And even Jackie Chan, it happens a lot with his character. And so, yeah, I guess that was maybe part of the sexual humor that was going on in the movie.
Yeah, because like you say, there is a lot of that, and a lot of that. I mean, again, it's made in a different time. A lot of that is just not aged well. You know, sex comedies often don't age well,
right.
But yeah, and a lot of those gags just kind of fell flat for me, and some of them were just so stupid. Like Psycho's friend, who is literally, like you say, in the IMDb credits and in the credits in the film, is just listed as Psycho's friend. Psycho's friend, it's her main characteristic is that she is a slender woman who is large chested, shall we say, and apparently can't keep her balance because of this. Now, if we're being extra super generous to the film, we could say that this is some sort of commentary on how comic book characters are drawn, but I don't think that is the case.
No, because I think too, I guess with manga that's probably something different, but I know in American comics, at least, with kind of like the explosion that they had of sort of the artist-driven scene in the late 80s, early 90s, that was like just starting to be a thing with guys like Rob Liefeld, you know, drawing these like X-Men characters, or Jim Lee drawing these X-Men characters that were like well endowed in that sense. It was kind of a new thing. So I almost think the other thing too, I know from Hong Kong films that I've watched, is that they'll take a woman role that the woman herself seems pretty and you know, not unattractive in any way, but they'll kind of sell her to us as unattractive, or they'll sell her to us as goofy. And she's just sort of like the butt of a lot of the jokes that happen in the movie. And I think that's what Seiko's friend was. Like, I mean, there's a point where she like gets attacked and like she gets punched in the stomach multiple times by one of the baddies. And it's like, for us in the Western movie, like we wouldn't really find that funny to see a woman getting punched in the stomach. But I guess it was being played for laughs and like physical comedy in this. And I've seen that come up in other Hong Kong movies where there's that character that, like, you know, it's not a kind of character that we would have in a Western movie, but they use that female character who's like the butt of jokes a lot in these Hong Kong films.
Yeah, that's true. And the other film that we covered on the podcast last January, we're really trying to sell this. If we have any lasting, if this podcast has any lasting legacy, this is what we're going to be. But yeah, one of the movies we covered was Mr. Nice Guy, which had similarly a number of problematic kind of sexist things going on. And also, Richard Norton was also the villain in that movie.
Yeah, Mr. Nice Guy, right? That one, I think, am I right that oh, no, I was thinking that was released theatrically here in the US, but it wasn't. I think it was just on video, but it was sort of trying to capture the popularity that he had gotten in the 90s here in the US. So it was one of those ones that like you could get on DVD or VHS, but it wasn't released here.
I think that's right, because Mr. Nice Guy came out the year before Rush Hour. And I think, you know, there was certain 90s Jackie Chan movies that were kind of released on DVD and VHS. Well, more VHS at that time, I guess. Yeah, both in like the UK and America and stuff like that. When Jackie Chan in that kind of late 90s period became much more popular in the West, even though he'd been obviously popular in Hong Kong and in a number of Asian countries since like the late 70s or whatever.
Yeah, actually, looking at IMDb, they're saying it actually was released theatrically in the US. So I think that's what it was I think they just took the Golden Harvest film and put it, in the theaters and just wanted to see, how it did. And it looks like it made about $12 million, which for that time isn't bad for the late 90s, especially for a movie like that. I don't know what it said its budget was. It's interesting you mentioned that. I don't know if they ever list the budget for these Golden Harvest films.
I don't think so. It's much more difficult to find out what the budget of a Hong Kong movie is as opposed to like an American movie, And again, I have to say there is a kind of leeriness to certain films. Not all Hong Kong movies. I've seen a lot of Hong Kong action movies that don't have this kind of leeriness. But like with Mr. Nice Guy, as much as I do enjoy, I was a fan of martial law, and I do enjoy Sammo Hung, and I think Sammo Hung is a great martial artist and kind of comic actor and all that. Most Sammo Hung movies that I've seen that he's directed do have like a kind of sleazy quality to them that is a little uncomfortable.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah. And it almost feels like with the Hong Kong movies that they were maybe, I don't know if 10 years is too extreme, but they were a bit behind where Western movies were in terms of like how they were treating those movies. And maybe even more than 10 years. It's kind of thinking about like movies from the 70s having those kinds of jokes. Even there, maybe not so much. So yeah, and I think you're right that the Sammo Hung in particular, because he never did any of that with his martial law show. So it must have been one of those things like once he came here, they were like, no, you can't do that over here.
It doesn't fly and stuff like that. But it's certainly if you see like the Lucky Star films or anything like that, there's definitely some stuff. But yeah, and again, like that's kind of the kind of least enjoyable parts of this movie. Like when we get more of like the kind of sex gags and the sleaziness and the kind of, and just some of the weirdness. Like there's that pool scene where Jackie's really starving, so he's kind of sleazing on the woman, but is imagining like her arms is, like her arms and legs is like, fried chicken, and her breasts is hamburgers and stuff like that. And you're just like, okay, movie, this is kind of getting weird now.
Right, exactly. And it was also that, Seiko's friend character that was happening to. So again, it's like that idea that for whatever reason, they don't want to make her character be like someone that the main characters would find sexually appealing. So instead it's that, like even though she's well endowed, right, it's the boobs are turning into cheeseburgers for Jackie Chan. Because like, yeah, it's almost like they sell this character as being not as attractive, even though she seemed like she was equally attractive to the friend that just to Seiko. But yeah, it's something that I see in these Hong Kong movies that just I think of Inspector Wears Skirts. There's a character like that who was just sort of like the butt of all the jokes, and that was their part in the movie.
Well, like you say, she does seem to be a butt of a lot of the jokes, and there are several scenes throughout the movie where she's just kind of doing pratfalls, and like you mentioned, you kind of referenced the scene where she gets kind of beaten up, which is kind of, yes, that whole sequence is kind of just really feels really awkward, and it feels really kind of tough to watch, because then straight after that, because basically she goes to try and seduce a henchman, and the henchman like beats her up, and then the cousin tries to beat up the henchman, but then kind of does the kind of full seduction that she was doing before, and then the guy falls for it, and it's just like there's an awkward homophobia to it, as well as like the awkwardness of just seeing her beaten up for laughs.
Right, because they'd already made that the AIDS joke too earlier on. So yeah, so you're kind of still working in that vein as well. Again, and again, that joke doesn't hit as bad. It doesn't come off as bad when the dubbed versions remove the bad AIDS joke as well.
I guess like trying to kind of segue back to like maybe some of the better things in the movie. We have two fights between Jackie Chan and Gary Daniels. The second of which is probably the most memorable thing in this film. But the first of which is actually also pretty good as well. It is awkwardly preceded by what you probably call a comedic attempted rape, which is awkward, but moving away from that, the fight itself in the bedroom between Rio and Gary Daniels' character. Well, I guess we'll just call them Jackie and Gary. That's pretty good fight they have in the round one of their fight.
Yeah, it was what I wanted when I saw Gary Daniels. You know, when I saw that he was in the film and it was a Jackie Chan movie, that was definitely what I wanted to see from that fight. And I think the other piece there, you talk about the awkward, the played for laughs attempted rape scene. That reminded me of like really bad like Love Boat gags where it'd be like some older actor like Red Buttons like chasing around like the tour director, the ship tour director, like chasing her around the room, and it's like, oh, this handsy old man, he just can't get out. And I'm like, my wife and I'll sometimes watch shows like the Love Boat now and be like, how was that ever played for laughs? But in the 70s, everybody thought it was funny, and I guess it's kind of maybe again if they're behind on sort of our trends. Yeah, and I mean to some extent it helped in making Gary Daniels' character sinister, but also the fact that like it was definitely awkward. But then they kind of like give us a palate cleanser with that fight scene, which I thought was good.
Absolutely, and I think both of them are working on high gear in that fight scene. And then even after that fight where the rest of the terrorists come in and they get captured by Richard Norton, and Jackie's got his hands up, but he's still occasionally punching Gary in the face and stuff. I thought that was really funny. That tickled me.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely showed like the level of quality of Gary Daniels, that he could, be at home in a fight like this with Jackie Chan. And looking at Daniels' career too, I mean, this is really early on. I mean, he's been doing some stuff to that point, but, nothing really of this level. I mean, I guess there was a few, but a lot of them are really small roles that he's in or small parts or something like that. And so, this was probably a really big test for him. And the fact that he showed up and did it, I thought was really good. And like you said, the way that they kind of did it creatively where like, the terrorists come in and he's still like, Jackie's still going to say, he does a lot of that in the film. I think he does a lot of the kind of comedic fighting that I really enjoyed.
I think most of the big kind of set piece fight scenes in the movie are pretty good. Like the kind of next big set piece fight in the movie is when Jackie takes on the two, they don't have names. They're just like two tall henchmen. And then Game of Death is playing on the cinema screen. So you have this fight on the cinema screen of Bruce Lee versus Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and from Game of Death. And then he's learning from Game of Death how to deal with these guys. And I thought that was a pretty creative fight scene.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. And I thought they did a lot of really good fun stuff with that scene. And I think kind of harkening back to your point about like, action movies that can have fun in the right way. This definitely was that, to have like a send up to an iconic Bruce Lee fight scene with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but then do it with Jackie Chan's like trademark, like both martial arts skill, but then also humor. Yeah, it made for a really fun scene. And the way they used the space as well with the movie theater, I thought was great too.
And I do love fight scenes like that. They're a bit comedic. And also, it's just one of those things where it seems like the character's overcoming impossible odds. Like, because at first, the henchmen are just totally beating him up and like sending him flying across the room. He's got like a giant footprint on his chest, and like he doesn't know how to deal with it at first. But then he sees certain moves in the movies and like, oh yeah, right. If I just like get at his ankle and do this, and it's just a really fun scene to watch, and probably one of the best scenes in the film.
Yeah, it definitely was one of the ones that made the movie for me. I think it just, I mean, of course, you get the Gary Daniels fight scene with him as well, and so there's these good moments there that kind of make you feel like, okay, yeah, you're in the right place, even if there's some of the jokes maybe aren't landing like they should.
Yeah, I think like the thing with the jokes is it comes back to so many of the jokes are so kind of leering and like because they feel kind of awkward, because even after that scene, it turns out that Jackie has like a microcomputer that can read fingerprints. Right. And he's reading fingerprints off the different things, and Shizuku or possibly Kyoko, he reads fingerprints off the back of her dress on the back side of her dress, and it turns out it is his own fingerprints. And yeah, and I looked into the actress who plays her, and yeah, she would have been 18 at the time, which makes it feel
right. Because what would Jackie Chan have been? He was born in the mid 50s, so he
was born in 1954. So this film was like filmed in 1992. So he would have been
38.
38. Yes, he would have been 30. He would have been 38 at the time, and she would have been 18 when it was filmed. Yeah,
right. Yeah. So yeah, and you're right. It is like, again, like those kinds of jokes, like you said, like it's funny in a way, like you get where they're going with the humor, but then at the same time, and I mean, there doesn't seem to be like an issue with the two of them being a potentially being a couple either. Like, and maybe Jackie Chan's character was supposed to be younger. Maybe that was part of it.
I guess so. But yeah, like, yes, it's never mentioned, like, because nobody's ever like, oh, that's kind of weird that you're kind of hitting on this young girl, the late teenager who's like 20 years younger than you. But yeah, no, that's never mentioned. Even like just after that, because it's really weird, because I really go back and forth on this film, because like some of the comedy and some of the humor really does work. Like there's a gag straight after with the microcomputer where he's reading the fingerprints off a doorknob, and then a henchman opens the door and he's reading the fingerprints off somebody's actual fingers. And then he does the thing where he kind of just slowly looks up and he's like, oh shit, there's a henchman. Gags like that totally work for me.
Yeah. And Jackie Chan does those gags better than anybody, I think. And so they just really work with him when you see it. Cause I think there's kind of a funny element to it where it's almost like a Three Stooges kind of thing where he sees it, but then the way he responds and he sort of like gets into this like defensive martial arts mode where he's trying to protect himself after the fact. It all works so well with him.
He is a great comedic actor, and obviously he's mentioned before that, you know, his great heroes are the likes of Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and things like that, and the kind of silent comedy greats. And he is like a mixture of, he is Bruce Lee mixed with crossed with Buster Keaton, you know, and he manages to pull that off really well in a lot of his films. And even here, where not everything works, particularly a lot of the sexual humor, a lot of the physical gags still really do fly.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, Buster Keaton might be a good comp too, because, you know, his silent movies, there's some of those that I watch where there's things in them like, you know, like blackface and things like that, where you're just like, oh, this doesn't play well. It doesn't work well. But the films themselves overall, like what Buster Keaton's doing in the movie, it does work. Like it's sort of timeless. And that, you know, I think like good stunt work, whether it's in a comedic way or in an action way, is always going to be impressive. And like, you know, when the jokes land, when they work in that sense, it's always going to work. And so maybe this movie's kind of a good comp for some of those.
So you know, you talking about Buster Keaton and talking about good stunt work and awkward blackface. That's a good segue onto probably the most memorable scene in this movie, the Street Fighter 2 fight scene between Jackie and Gary Daniels. Gary Daniels playing Ken. Jackie playing, in this movie, it's called E-Hond instead of E-Honda. I did find out, fun fact, apparently they did not call him E-Honda because Honda is obviously a make of car. And Jackie Chan had a contract with Mitsubishi at the time, so they didn't want Honda in the movie.
Okay, that makes sense. I wondered about that because everybody else seemed to be in the film, and they were using the music and everything.
Yep. Apparently that's why.
Okay, that makes sense now.
So yes, and they have a fight scene, And obviously the awkward blackface comes in, whereas it's brown face, because one of the, I guess, because there's a mixture of like Hong Kong, Japanese and Taiwanese actors. So I'm not sure. I think it's one of the Hong Kong actors, one of the DJs. I think he's one of the Hong Kong actors is like browned up as Dalsim, which is, it's not good.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because I don't know how that, like, I know, like, if a white actor did that, that would just be, it'd be horrible. I wonder, like, with Asian actors, because I know that there's, obviously there is sort of that, I don't know if it's animosity, if is the right term, definitely, rivalry sort of between China and India about, or Indian subcontinent, I think, in certain things. And so, I wonder that if this was screened in India, how that would have been taken.
Yeah, I'm not sure. And it's kind of funny as well, because like, it seems like, you're kind of talking about like the difference between East and West and how things, some things wouldn't fly and some things would fly. And the weird thing about this kind of thing is, like, even thinking of like movies of the time, I don't think this sort of thing would fly in movies. However, like in the West, both in America and in the UK, like this sort of thing still happened throughout the 90s quite frequently on like sketch comedy shows on TV.
Right.
Like up until like the early because I think like Jimmy Kimmel was like Oprah in like the early 2000s. Yeah. Right. So up until like the early 2000s, this was still relatively common. Yeah,
because it was a recent. I don't know if the trending drama on Twitter made it outside the U.S., but speaking of Jimmy Kimmel, his former love interest Sarah Silverman, she got into trouble because she had gotten into it with some people about some of the stuff that Kanye West had said, but then people dragged up an image of her in blackface where she tried to make the joke. She said, I'm having menstrual cramps. That was the joke she tried to make. And it was just like, you look at it and it's like, ooh, this is really rough. So yeah, you make a great point that comedians thought they could get away with this kind of thing. I think beyond the point where movies like this did. I mean, another example, and I guess this is necessarily an American example, but Uwe Boll made like a parody of his own Blood Rain movies. He made a movie called Blubberella with like kind of an overweight actress playing the is that Blood Rain? Is that what the character's name was? Yeah, Blood Rain. He made like an overweight woman playing that role, and he was making fun. There was a scene where he's making fun of the movie Precious, where he's playing the Monique character. With the blackface and everything. And I'm watching it, I'm like, what possessed anybody to even think that, like, one, that movie Precious doesn't really have anything that's worth making fun of in it. I mean, it wasn't really a funny movie. But two, like, why you would do that? And it's like the rest of the movie was, it was a lot of jokes about her being overweight. They were kind of like, okay, I get it. She's overweight. She needs to eat or something like that. It was like kind of that stuff. But again, the blackface piece, I mean, this was like the late 2000s, early 2010s that this movie came out. And again, this is, German, maybe it's a little bit different understanding of sort of those kinds of things versus like the country, like the UK or the United States might see it. But even then I was like, wow, like I thought we were like well past even thinking that this is possibly a good thing, but maybe it's different, maybe in Europe, for example.
Yeah, I think like, it is a bit different. I think, yes, we probably don't have enough time in this podcast to go into the various different cultural quirks of different countries and and their different acceptances of blackface and it's generally it's not a good thing. People, we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, and I think for us, it definitely seeing it done in this film, it definitely you could. It's similar to the age joke. Like it definitely kind of hurt the sensibilities for sure.
However, the fight itself is really fun, and the kind of glorious wig that they give Gary Daniels is amazing.
Yes. The wig, and they also darken his eyebrows as well to really make him look like the cartoonish character that he is in the game.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean,
well, the other thing that kind of struck me about it is that after Jackie Chan is E Honda, he then is Chun-Li. Yeah, And one of the things that's interesting is for a movie that's just rife with chauvinism, with like leering kind of creepy jokes, with a lot of handsy fellows, needing to be rebuffed by women and all of that kind of stuff. When it came to like the sexy Chun-Li outfit that you would expect, like, that they may have made like the character, for example, who played Seiko, Mei Yao, you'd think that she would be wearing it, or one of the other characters. They go with Jackie Chan wearing it and say, like, no, we're not going to let you sexualize Chun-Li in this. And so that was really fascinating too, that of all the places that they had been using that kind of objectification of women and sort of the leering kind of jokes, this was the one place they didn't do it. And maybe there was a commentary there throughout the movie that these characters that were sexualizing the women weren't good for it. And maybe but I mean, maybe I'm giving the movie the benefit of the doubt too much too, but it was just an interesting thing that this was the one place they definitely didn't want to do it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's kind of interestingly filmed as well, because like there's certain sequences, like when he does the helicopter kick, and when he does like certain like special Street Fighter combo modes, the film itself almost goes into a kind of arcade vision, which I thought was quite interesting too.
Yeah, they did a lot with it that I think it's almost like, because we think of we think of video game movies, being adapted, to video games being adapted to movies, whereas this took the kind of the absurdity of what happens in a video game and placed it in this film environment. And I thought it was a really fun take on it. And like you said, the use of the different film to give us a different vibe or a different look at what we were seeing, I think even added to that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think as much as it's the one scene that, as much as the kind of awkward brown face that is, isn't good, it's the one scene where the DJ comedic relief characters actually are kind of fun, and like I didn't just find them irritating. I was just like, they actually kind of add a little bit to the scene of their interjection between Jackie being beat up as E Honda or E Hond, and then like emerging as Chun-Li.
Yeah, because that was like, because the other one plays Guile,
yes,
and he's got the hair spiked up really well, and I guess that was part of the idea, is that maybe Blanca would have been too much to do. But I think they wanted it to be like a similar goofy character, so that's why they went with Dalton. But the Guile part of it was hilarious, because he's like doing the sonic boom and all of that stuff. And I mean, they had the sounds down perfectly, so you could kind of feel like you're walking into an arcade and hearing the game being played. With the way that the sounds that they were making of the characters, and when they would throw their fireballs and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, like most of the movie is pretty good after that, because we're really, I mean, apart from the kind of scene that we've already broken down, the kind of homophobic henchman thing, there is just kind of pretty much consistent action scenes towards the end of the movie, and most of them I think are pretty good, whether that be the ones that involve Jack himself, or like there's even that hallway fight that has the current gang Kotetsu and Seiko finding a bunch of henchmen in the hall, and that's pretty good action sequence there.
Yeah, that was really good. And the way they were kind of pinned down with the baddies, and then he would like throw his cards, or like trying to find ways to like sort of get out of that situation. They bring in like the Thai stormtroopers to storm the boat. It's like you said, it almost has the feel, as we start getting into these, like you said, like the kind of consistent action, that it starts to build up to like the usual like blockbuster movie end that I enjoyed. And it was interesting too, because I think with the scene in the hallway, there is no real humor in there, and you're almost like wondering, is there gonna be a joke somewhere in there, when it really is more just serious of them like trying to get out of the situation where they're pinned down and the guy with the cards is getting shot at, and then that kind of thing.
Yeah, it does feel tonally quite different from the rest of the film, and I don't know if that necessarily worked, just because it felt so kind of jarring, because we have like, once Kotetsu is shot, and then he kind of, and he manages to kill the kind of the last guard with the help of Seiko, and then we have like this kind of emotional moment between them of like, he's kind of half dying, and then he kind of is like, oh, we'll meet again, and I'll take you out on a date kind of thing, and it's supposed to, So it's almost supposed to be this kind of sweet romantic moment, which it kind of is, but it feels very strange just how different it is from the rest of the film.
Right, because pretty much every other moment in the movie that there's a sweet romantic moment there. Every other time there's a sweet romantic moment, there's always a punchline, or there's the joke that takes us out of it, right? Like if it's like, Jackie Chan like having a moment with Kaori, and then a beautiful woman walks by and steals his attention, like that's kind of what we expect there. That doesn't really happen there. And I guess too, the fact, right, that they wanted, I guess, by having him get shot in the arms, it made it hard for him to throw the cards. And I guess that was the device to kind of add the suspense layer in there. But again, like you said, tonally, it didn't quite fit as much as the other parts where, Jackie Chan's getting shot at, he's getting all kinds of things happening to him. There's still like a goofiness to it.
Yeah. I mean, there definitely is, because even the kind of previous scene just before the kind of the whole sequence and just actually just before the second fight with Gary, there's like, he's captured and there's like a kind of, he's about to be executed, and then the gang kind of rescue him from the execution. But again, this is played almost entirely for laughs, and we have Kyoko or Shizuku kind of, doing a bit of gymnastics on the sails and kind of stuff, and we have the Seiko's friend falling over because of her boobs again, and we have all this kind of goofiness going on. So it's still mainly goofy throughout the movie. There's a sense as well that, because there's a scene earlier on when the thieves are kind of talking amongst themselves, and obviously there's been plans before that have not gone right, and Richard Norton's kind of like, oh no, but it'll go well this time. So there's a kind of sense that throughout the movie that these are not competent villains.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And it's like, even before they even commit the crime, right? You've got Gary Daniels and then the other long-haired baddie that's with him, who are just down there trying to pick up women, right? That are just hitting on women and not really taking anything seriously. So yeah, and you can see like that they can be easily fooled, it seems like, at times. And that there is like you said, there's almost like a comic nature to it. But yet at the same time, right, they carry off this plan to start with that is very much like the usual hostage taking plan that you see in any other movie that's carried out by a sophisticated group of baddies.
Yeah, that's true. It is quite fun as well that Richard Norton, apparently I read again, or I was kind of reading into the kind of background of the movie, the gun that Richard Norton has is the RoboCop gun, which I think is quite entertaining.
Yeah, because speaking of movies that pulled off the mix, right, of comedy and action well, RoboCop was like probably the best, with actually the combination of comedy, action, and social commentary. That whole thing just really works there. So yeah, it's kind of fitting that would be the gun that he would have in this, for sure.
Yes, that is true. RoboCop is one of the, we've already mentioned Commando. RoboCop is another one that's kind of top tier absurdist action. You've got these things, like Hard Boil's a good other one. But a lot of John Woo movies, Face Off, and also things like Con Air. These are like the, top tier absurdist action films.
Right. Well, and the funny thing about RoboCop here in America, I don't know if it was the same in the UK, where they edited the movie to get it like under, I guess, NC-17 or X or something like that. And in editing the movie, they actually made it less funny. Like the scene where the big new model robot shoots the poor businessman. In the edited version, like you just kind of see a little bit of him being shot, and it's kind of a more sinister thing. Whereas when you watch it unedited and you see all the blood and everything, it looks really absurd. And there's really no, it's not like a scary thing in that sense. You can really see the goofiness that's going on there. And so RoboCop was an interesting one in that sense, that because the Motion Picture Association, and trying to give it a better rating, with the editing they did to it, they actually took some of the humor out of it. And when you watch the uncut version, it's completely, it's every bit that sort of absurdist piece, but also in a way that's like the commentary is just so fantastic.
Yeah, the kind of satire throughout the RoboCop is really good. Like RoboCop is obviously just an amazing action film and one of Verhoeven's best. But I think that I generally love his trilogy of absurdist action films, like RoboCop, Total Recall, and Starship Troopers. They're all gems.
Yeah, and it is. I never saw the remake of Total Recall. I would be curious to kind of know how that goes, because part of what made that movie work was, again, the absurdist piece of it.
Yeah, the reason I never watched that remake is because it seemed like, from what I heard about it, it was much less humorous than the original Total Recall. And it's, it didn't have that kind of same absurdist satire. It sounded like it was more of a straightforward sci-fi action movie, which I was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I want that.
No, exactly. I think, that's one of those ones. I think just in general, Schwarzenegger, I think he doesn't get enough credit for being, the comedic tongue-in-cheek aspect of him being able to play those roles so well. But you're right. Like, trying to remake that as a serious movie just sort of loses a good chunk of what made it so great.
Absolutely. Because that's like the real spirit of the movie, the real heart of the movie, the kind of the humor and the satire and like Verhoeven playing with the kind of themes that he loves to play with. But back to this movie, where I guess we're nearly at the end of the film. We get a flurry. Oh yes, something that we should mention is, out of nowhere there is an elite police force called the Taiwanese Thunder Team, who we, as the audience, I think, are supposed to join the dots that Seiko called?
Right.
Question mark?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Was it Seiko or was it Kyoko? Somebody called them, and you're right. It's just sort of like, oh yeah, here they are with their helicopters landing on the ship. And it's interesting because they turn the tide to some extent, but then the film mitigates their ability to turn the tide to make sure that Jackie Chan still has that ending fight scene with Richard Norton.
Yes, that's right, because Richard Norton is pretty much the last man standing. So the Taiwanese Thunder Team, who are a terrifying unit, who wear steel masks for some reason. I don't know why they were issued with them, but yeah, they managed to kill pretty much all of the henchmen. But then, because Richard Norton's men have placed bombs throughout the ship, and Richard Norton has control to control these bombs, like, we basically have like a montage of sequences where the Taiwanese Thunder Team kill all the henchmen and then kill a unit of henchmen and then get blown up by one of Richard Norton's bombs. And then we just get a couple of these sequences of kind of the same thing. Henchmen mown down pretty easily, and then Thunder Team blown up.
Yeah, and then it segues into a nice action sequence with Jackie Chan where he's in these rooms that are getting blown up by Richard Norton, and he's got to like dodge them, right? He's got to sort of run out. And when you think about the fact that this is probably being done in reality, right? That he's really running out of these rooms and they're blowing them up after he runs out of them. It sort of adds that level of danger that Hong Kong movies have that you don't usually get from Western films.
That is true. I think that it is interesting watching films from this period because, like, when we covered Super Cop on the podcast, we talked about this as well, where there was obviously a period in Hong Kong cinema. I think it's a bit different now, but particularly throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, health and safety basically did not exist in the Hong Kong film industry. And so you get all this just totally mental stunt work, which is amazing to watch, but you can kind of see why they don't really do it anymore.
What I love about it too is that they put these actors through the ringer, and then what they do is in the credits, they show you all the times that they were almost killed. And I remember watching Inspector Wears Skirts where they did this like routine where they were running through this obstacle course. And I guess the leader, trying to really give them the impetus to really run through this obstacle course, sets the ground on fire. So it's like sort of like the flames are kind of catching up to them if they don't run fast enough. And it shows all the times it didn't work and they had to like put their feet out and everything. Like suddenly, and it is amazing. Like you said, like that they almost sort of celebrate this kind of thing. And I mean, to be fair, I think the actors that come through, especially like, Norton and Rothrock also talk about that being like a great experience for them. But yeah, it was just, like, let's just, it sort of put these actors through the ringer and hope they end up okay.
So that just kind of leaves us with like the final fight. Now, Norton is pretty good in this film. Like I've seen him better. He's good at playing a kind of maniacal villain. Like I do. This is one of the things that you often get in Hong Kong action movies that I do enjoy. That is over the top that some people don't really like. But like villains who are just kind of pure comic book villains who after they do every evil act, they kind of let out a kind of big evil laugh of ha 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 ha, you know, something like that. I enjoy all that shit. And Richard Norton's pretty good at it. I think throughout the movie, he's a bit underused, but in this final fight sequence, I think he really comes into his own. And it's the various different stages of this fight sequence that I think are really done well.
It's interesting because he plays villains a lot in DTV movies, but those villains don't tend to be as over the top, and they tend to also be more like just sort of brutally sinister, which isn't as much fun. I think for him, I got the sense in watching him in this that he really relished being able to play this baddie. He seemed to be having a lot of fun with it.
I think like his highlights in the movie is like particularly when in the middle of the movie when he's doing the card game and he's just like shooting people and laughing and like, and, you know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because again, it's like, that's the kind of thing that's kind of like you said, kind of more in like the RoboCop vein of humor where it's like, it's really dark humor, but it's being played up so like over the top where it's like, you know, like it's like if you lose at the card game, you get killed. And of course, you know, that the house almost always wins in card games at the casino. So it's like, you're really, you know, you're really in for it. And it's like, you know, yes, these poor guys are getting murdered there. And so that's not so funny, but it was kind of like, it was kind of that element of being played for laughs. And I think Norton leaned into it so well that it was sinister on the one hand, but and it added a sense of danger to the movie in the proceedings. But at the same time, like you said, it was that over the top baddie that was so much fun.
And I think I was wrong to say that, like, it's not that Richard Norton is underpowered at any time. It's just, I think he's just kind of underutilized because like we kind of discussed, there's so many moving parts and often, you know, we've got like Seiko and her friends doing their thing. We've got Kiori doing her thing. We've got Kyoko doing her own thing, getting captured and stuff like that. And then she meets up with Reo, and you know, it's like and then we've got like goofy stuff with the cousin, and we're following the DJs sometimes, and so it's kind of very kind of all thinly spread. So he's kind of underutilized throughout the movie. We kind of don't get enough of just like kind of straight up the villain doing this thing. And even with the kind of Gary Daniels character, you know, I think we could have had like more interaction between the kind of Richard Norton character and the Gary Daniels character. They could have been like more like a double team, like Tommy Lee Jones and Gary Busey and Under Siege kind of thing, kind of riffing off each other.
Yeah, I think that might be the best comp for what would have worked here. Because I was thinking Die Hard, but Die Hard was more just Rickman. But we still got a lot of Rickman, you know. I mean, there's that really great scene with the guy who is like the yuppie or whatever, who's like talking about how he could deliver John McClane and he ends up shooting him, you know. But
yeah.
You know, there's that kind of stuff. And I think you're right. Like, that's one of the things about, especially, I think, with Norton in particular, but I think Daniels as well, that we lose them for such long periods. And when you think about it, right, like when we have, like, for example, you know, Seiko and, you know, the guy who throws the cards and all of them, a lot of times they're in just like these hallway spaces interacting with faceless baddies. Like, they aren't interacting with Daniels or Norton or any of them. So anytime we get those scenes, we're getting taken away from really kind of from everybody. We're not, you know, we have no Jackie Chan in those scenes and we have no Norton or Daniels. And so, yeah, those are areas where I think we could have used, you know, I think if had this been on a smaller scale with fewer characters, we probably would have gotten more Daniels and Norton.
Yeah. And I think like it might have worked better if we just kind of streamlined it down. If it was mainly just, we have Jackie Chan's character, we have Kiori's assistant, we have the girl who, you know, her father wants back, and then we have a little bit of a kind of, even a little with the age difference, maybe a little bit creepy, but like we have a little bit of a love triangle with them, and they're mainly together. and then we have scenes with like the villains, and it's just the two villains, and then we didn't have all these like the cousin and the DJs and all this and all these kind of extra characters that we don't really need, then yeah, it might have worked a bit better.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it could have even been that, like, I mean, I know the whole point with Kaori's character, she's trying to like get away from Jackie Chan because she's upset with him on the cruise. But, even that, they could have made it that they knew Kyoko was going on the cruise and that's why they were going, like they could have done some pieces to sort of trim some of the characters a bit. And yeah, it's interesting because it in that sense, it had that feel of like the disaster, the 70s disaster movie where there's just like too many people and it's easy to lose people. It's like, oh, Fred Astaire's in this. Well, how long is Fred Astaire in the movie for? He's like, barely in it. And so it's like, okay, do we get enough Steve McQueen and Paul Newman or something like that in the Towering Inferno? That's kind of, I think, what happens here with Norton and Daniels, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I do think that's a shame. But at least, like I say, at least Norton did get to shine in this final fight. And we have like kind of various stages of this final fight because first of all, Norton has like these kind of metal sticks and Jackie just has his fists. And then Jackie has like these kind of wooden weapons, kind of arm weapons that he's fighting with the sticks. And then the metal sticks turn into kind of whips. And then he's fighting with the whips. And then eventually Jackie manages to get a pole and he's fighting the metal whips with the pole. So it's like a kind of 4-stage type fight. And so it's really quite well done. And it's kind of back and forth, like who's winning, who's losing. And even when we know that Jackie's going to win at the end of the day, there is a real kind of back and forth there.
Yeah, and it also had a good mix. We were talking about like kind of the overdoing the goofy. It was a good mix of goofy and solid fight choreography that I thought worked well too, that it could be played for laughs at moments and then other moments, have some really inspired, either like him jumping over chairs and things like that.
Yeah, I think there was a good mix of that, of like, because there's a moment where, sometimes it's just pure serious martial arts action, and then you'll get like a little moment like when Jackie's like blocking the different things and almost doing kind of dance moves. But yeah, and then you've got other times where things are exploding, he's jumping over tables and chairs and, particularly the kind of final bit with the pole and stuff like that really kind of balances well. And yeah, if the movie had kind of more consistently kind of played on kind of the best parts of it, like the best parts of it we've talked about, that are absurdist, that are over the top, but managed to balance it out and it's not just pure goofiness for the sake of goofiness.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think that's what we get here, is that it's just, like you said, it's a nice balance. I think even like before that, when Jackie encounters Seiko and she's like got all these weapons on her, and she essentially like jumps into his arm from a high distance. He catches her, and then he's like swinging her around so she can shoot the baddies. And it's like, if we didn't have so much groping going on in the earlier scenes, it would have been kind of a unique dynamic situation where like he's kind of making himself almost look bad to Kaori, that, but because it's been happening so much, and I guess that's part of his character, right? That's who his character is, that he's just always very handsy and always hitting on women and stuff like that all the time. So maybe that's what it was. But that was even that was like a fun use of that sort of that construct that they'd had throughout the film.
It's one of the things that actually does play quite well, even though it's like playing on, because like apparently I've not seen the manga, I've not read the manga, I've not seen the anime or something. But apparently this character is like that. He's a bit of a perv. He's always hitting on the ladies. But it's playing on his perviness, but it actually is pretty funny because it doesn't feel objectionable.
Right. Right. It felt like when it was in this context where he's swinging her around to shoot the baddies, that it was more like putting him in a compromising position to make Kaori upset with him, which in that respect was actually kind of more fun.
Yeah, and it's done much more playfully. It just feels different to a lot of the other kind of pervy moments that happen throughout the movie. So, I mean, yeah, obviously Richard Norton ends up exploding himself in a bank of televisions, and I want your take on this. Basically, when we have like that sequence straight after the final fight sequence, the villain has exploded himself. And then we get, like, one of the running gags throughout the movie is Jackie Chan's character has not eaten all day. And so he's desperately looking for food, like, the whole time throughout the entire movie. And then we get a scene between Kyoko and him, and she says, "Oh, you know, what do you want? I'll do anything you want," kind of thing. And then he says, "Oh, I really want like a bowl of wonton noodles." And then we pan out from the cruise ship, and then in my head, I was like, "Okay, cut to credits."
Yeah.
However, that's not what happens, is it, Matt?
Right. No, exactly. And I guess they felt like there was some unfinished business that they wanted to attend to, maybe in particular with Kaori and him. But yeah, it felt like it would have been the perfect place to put those, like when you're zooming backwards there. And I almost wonder if that was the original plan because of the way that shot went.
Yeah, it's very curious to me because it does feel very much of like end of movie cut to credit shot.
Yeah.
And it's a good, like, even though the gags about him constantly wanting a meal or maybe a few too many, it's a relatively decent joke, and I think it's quite a good kind of joke line to kind of end on, like a quippy line to end on. But then, yeah, we get this kind of awkward scene where Kyoko's returned to her father because she's ran away from home or whatever, and then her father basically offers to sell her off to Jackie Chan's character. And Jackie Chan basically says, "No, I'm a philanderer for life. I'm never getting married." And then, yeah, but Kaori kind of overhears this conversation, gets mad because for some reason Kaori is in love with Ryo. And yeah, and then she runs away, and then he tries to catch up with her and offers her a rose and tries to explain that, "No, I turned the marriage offer down." But then Seiko comes up in a car and then starts flirting with Ryo, despite the fact that she showed no real romantic interest in him throughout the rest of the film, and we kind of thought that she was more romantically interested in Kotetsu.
Right.
But anyway, it's a complete side point, I guess. And then basically Kaori hits him with a big hammer, and then we get shot back into the dream sequence, and that's the end of the film. So it's a very strange ending.
Yeah, because one, the dad is really creepy himself, saying like, "Boy, yeah, my daughter's not bad looking, huh?" Which is like, okay, like that's a weird thing to be saying about your daughter to Jackie Chan's character. But then, yeah, I didn't realize that there was this piece about how that this seems to happen a lot. To Kaori hits him with the big hammer to sort of keep him in line. Yeah. I guess they wanted to get one more scene of him getting hit in the head with the big hammer. I guess that's why they tacked all this on at the end.
I guess so. It'd be interesting because, like, even though I particularly when I was a kid and in my teens, I was interested in anime, watched quite a lot of anime. This is not a franchise I'm familiar with at all. So, like, I'd almost be intrigued to know what kind of fans of the franchise kind of thought of this film and whether they thought like they really needed this call back to this regular gag that's apparently in the manga comics with the big hammer. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, I would be curious to know overall kind of how this is. Because I was talking recently about Mark Dacascos with Peter Tom Joliffe on a podcast episode. And we were talking about Double Dragon, and how that was such a bad adaptation. And, that kind of in the 90s in particular, right, that adaptations just weren't great. Like, we had the video game movies like Double Dragon or Super Mario Brothers, comic book adaptations weren't always great either. And so I wonder if this was also a bad adaptation. We just don't know because we've only, we're kind of coming at it without really knowing it as well.
Yeah, that's true. I guess, like, I do feel like probably this wasn't something that went over well. I just feel like it's very much in the kind of 90s comic book movie mode, where, like, it seems to come at it kind of from the same angle as, like, Hollywood comic book movies of the time, like, kind of coming at it kind of from above, kind of looking down on it, kind of being like, comic books are stupid, they're for idiots. These idiots will eat up anything we give them, kind of thing. Which I feel is the attitude of like a lot of comic book movies that were made in the 90s, be they like Hollywood or Hong Kong or wherever they be.
Yeah, because I mean, the big issue with the Double Dragon one was that like they were trying to market it to kids, but really the video game was something that would have been played by mid like teens in their like their mid teens. It wouldn't have been for young kids. So like trying to make it a PG movie just didn't work. I mean, I don't know what this would have. I mean, this would have probably been rated R, I think, right? And if it was released of the US, maybe the 18 rating in the UK, just because of it's not too overtly sexual, but I guess it was PG-13. So I guess maybe that makes sense. It would have been PG-13 because the violence wasn't as bad.
I guess there's not a lot of blood, and I think if I was to guess, I would say that probably in the UK probably would have been released as maybe like a 15 because like there's violence, there's quite a lot of violence, but there's not a lot of blood, and there's a lot of sexual humor and groping and handiness and quite scantily clad women, but there's no actual nudity.
And no sex either.
And no sex. So I would guess it was maybe like a 15.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense why this would be PG-13 as well. So like there's a lot of innuendo, but nothing too much. Because I think for a comic book movie at that time, I mean, I guess, with us talking about Batman Returns, where they had a lot of, the Penguin was kind of was very pervy at a lot of parts of that movie. This kind of humor, I guess, it for a comic book movie, it was a little bit racier for what comic book and video game movies were doing at that time, but also maybe the manga itself might have targeted an older audience too at that time.
I would suggest so, because from what I've read about the manga, the central character, Rio, is like kind of is pervy, and that's why he gets hit by the big family. So he is this kind of rakish private detective character. So I would imagine it's skewed into kind of mid-teens maybe, or mid to late teens, rather than being read by like kids or anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so it may not have had the identity crisis that a lot of movies in America did, but I wonder too, like how goofy the manga was, and if maybe that was where people may not have been a fan of it. It's almost it could have almost been like kind of like a Batman send up, like we had in the 60s.
Sure. Yeah, and I think like maybe from what I've read, it seems like the level of goofiness is the level of goofiness that we enjoyed in the movie, not the extra level of goofiness that we didn't enjoy. From the little bits I've seen and kind of like researching this episode, it seems like it's absurd. And it's goofy, but it's not just kind of waka waka, like
right.
Like this movie is a lot of the time.
Yeah, because this movie was literally using like Hanna-Barbera sounds at points, and I mean, and there's even that scene where Kyoko or Shizuko, she knocks the other blonde, long-haired baddie, the one that's not Gary Daniels. She knocks him down from like a high perch, and he falls, and when he lands on the deck, he goes through the deck, and it's like the shape of the body kind of going through that you see in like the old like Looney Tunes movies.
Yeah, it's like a Hot Shots gag or something. Yeah,
right, exactly. Yeah, so it was a lot of that kind of stuff in the movie that you wonder. It's almost like they were pulling on different cartoon traditions beyond the manga.
But that is it, listener. That is City Hunter in its entirety. Yeah, we've maybe enticed you to watch it. We've maybe completely put you off watching it. It's a real mixed bag. It's got some real fun bits in it. It's got some real naff bits in it. But yeah, I think. Do you have any final thoughts? Do you want to give like an overall rating?
Yeah, I think this is a fun movie to watch. I think especially with its availability on streaming. I think, going into it knowing that you may have your sensibilities hurt potentially with some of the jokes, kind of understanding that part of it. I think overall, despite having some of those moments, I think overall it does what it's supposed to, where it kind of has the mix of fun. And I mean, the Jackie Chan fight scenes with Gary Daniels, with Norton, and also with the two really tall guys, and some of the other sequences, the action sequences are really, really good that you want from a Hong Kong film. So I think overall it's one that I would recommend.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in the same boat. I think that there's some things that really don't work. The soundtrack can get a bit grating at times. Certain characters are annoying, particularly like the cousin character and things like that. Don't really need him in the movie. But yeah, the great thing about it is that pretty much all the fight scenes work. There's just some really great memorable moments. The moments you just kind of covered there. Like I say, it won't be for everyone. Some people will detest it because of its extreme goofiness, but the toned down goofiness moments, the kind of more absurd moments, do work for me. And yeah, there's enough to make it kind of watchable. But yeah, it just leaves me to thank you very much, Matt, for coming on the show, and just once again tell our listeners all about the DTV Connoisseur, what you're up to, anything you want to plug, all your social medias.
All right. Well, so the main site is dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. That's really where you can find everything. I would say, I think one of the things, if you go to the site through mobile, you may not get all the links, but there's an ability to click at the bottom to view web version, and that will give you all the links if you need them. But, in terms of social, it's DTV Connoisseur on Twitter. I think it's Direct to Video Connoisseur on Facebook. And so, that's where I mostly post things. But then from the author standpoint, my new novel is Holtman Arms. It's available on Amazon and Amazon both as a paperback and in Kindle. It just follows this character, Colvin Hall. He writes a famous romance novel series, but he writes it under a pen name. And so he's kind of tired of not getting credit for his work. And so sort of as the book goes on, the cracks start to show as he starts to maybe either get credit or, people start to maybe find out about him and whether or not he can kind of get the toothpaste back in the tube when people discover who he is.
I recommend all my listeners check out all of that stuff. And it's just thank you very much again for coming on the show. It's good to have you on, and hopefully we can have you on again sometime later. I think we're booked because we're only doing monthly. I think we're booked up for this year, but definitely if we continue, we will definitely have you back.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun, and I anytime I'll be happy to come back anytime.
And if you really enjoyed the show, listener, you can hit us up on socials at All 90s Action, or I think it's actually just at 90s Action. And you can talk to me on Twitter if you want at Scott Murphy 85. And rate, review, and subscribe to the show. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get podcasts. 5 stars, please, because the algorithm thinks we're shit otherwise. So 5 stars, get on that. And the last thing it leaves me to say is that just join us again next month when we will be covering the film American Yakuza. Until then, though, see ya.